We worked mostly on presential, training, so collocated training 1 year ago. And then there was this thing with COVID, the pandemics, working remotely. And I think that when this happened, we had already almost 6 months of planning meetings, retrospectives, daily stand-ups. So when we had to change the way we worked, this was really, really important. So we had to reinvent the organization, and we had one of the best years, the best year the company had, although all the things that we had to face.
I'd like to welcome you both. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I've had the pleasure of knowing you both for quite some time now, and we've collaborated together in different ways, and especially through Learn S3. I remember very clearly when we first met each other, both of you in different contexts, and one of the things that struck me most was your deep enthusiasm for S3, a sense of resonance with that and how it fit with what you were doing at the time. And I know that since then you've been working with S3 in many different contexts and synergizing it with a whole bunch of skills and experience that you brought from before as well. So I wanted to have the conversation with you this evening to dive in a little bit to some examples of how you've been using S3 and share a little bit about that for others who would like to know. So welcome. So, Mira, could you maybe just briefly introduce yourself a bit first? And then I know you have a few examples to share with us regarding your work with the European Commission. So perhaps you could make a brief introduction and then give us some insights into what you've been up to there over the last couple of years.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Mira Bangel, and I'm originally from Germany, but based in Madrid. My background is communications management and environmental management. So I've been doing lots of things and living in many, many different places around the world over the past couple of years. And I'm very, very excited about anything that has to do with group processes in organizations. So sometimes I work more as a facilitator, facilitating participatory processes at events and also with communities of practice. And sometimes I'm working inside of companies, helping with transformation and with team coaching. And so on. And I work with a large variety of stakeholders. And I actually co-founded SenseTribe, which is a still small consultancy, but more really like a tribe of freelancers that are very much interested in working on impact-related projects. So projects that have some sort of positive impact on the environment and on society. And we work with corporate clients, but also with NGOs, with foundations, with a lot of international networks. Mainly in Europe and also with the institutions.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hugo, how about you jump in and just introduce yourself briefly as well?
I was muted. Well, I'm Hugo Lopes. I'm Portuguese. So, but now I'm living in Spain. My background is of software engineer. So I'm a software engineer, but I'm an entrepreneur. So I had my own company, started my company in 2001 in Lisbon. We grew for 15 years. Then I left and moved to Spain. I would say that my passion is effective collaboration. You see the guitars in the back. So I love music. I did theater when I was a teenager, and we always co-created stuff. So we never followed a script. We never played music of someone else. There's also this kind of collaboration inside this project since I was a teenager. And then when I came to the real world, working at my first company, it was quite different. No, so I would say that I've been in the last 20-something years. I was looking for ways to bring this kind of connection, flowing collaboration that I experienced in this. As a teenager in the theater and music to a work environment and between organizations. So that's my passion.
Okay, great. Thank you, Hugo. And I think you've done a pretty good job of achieving that in many ways as well. So let's come to some examples from you in a while, Hugo. But first of all, then, Mira, could you tell us, I'm particularly interested about some of your examples because it's, okay, so it's the European Commission, it's an institution, it's got a lot of legacy. So one, it's exciting to hear of openings there and reaching out for new ways of becoming more effective. And secondly, it's hard to ignore the implications of kind of government entities or entities connected to governing at scale in some way, opening up to different tool sets like S3, for example. So it'd be really great to hear about some of what the challenges were maybe that they called you in to respond to, and some of what you've been doing and the outcomes of that.
Yeah, sure. I think, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about an example of a program. I'm not going to mention it, so I can really just freely speak about it. Basically, I was hired by a framework contractor that works for the European Commission. It's the usual way of how the Commission, or one of the usual ways of how the Commission hires different people. And I was invited to help with a program that the Commission carries out in collaboration with different implementing agencies or development agencies across Europe. And it's a program focusing on Latin America. And so basically, I was invited, first of all, just to host a management committee meeting. And they have been doing this meeting already for quite a while. And they were telling me it lasted 2 days. And that the last time they had a facilitator, there was a big conflict that happened in the session. People screamed at each other, and the facilitator actually left, and some of the participants also left the session. So it was really quite a tense, high-level conflict environment. And so I was very much trying to prepare myself as much as I could for hosting that meeting to be able to sustain this. And it was around 20 people that were present that represented different development agencies, some different parts of the Commission as well, and even in international organizations as well, implementing agencies. And so basically, I first had some interviews with different people across the organization to understand a little bit more who the decision makers are and what exactly the issues were. And then basically I decided to already, when I set up the room, I came a day earlier, I hung the Artful Participation poster and the Good Enough for Now, Safe Enough to Try poster on the wall. I didn't mention to anybody that it was about S3, so I just basically brought that in as elements that will support us during the 2 days. And when I opened the session and invited people I basically invited people to bring in or to practice artful participation and to look for good enough for now solutions, just very briefly without giving them much context. And then when moments of tension happened during the conversation, I would refer to those posters. So I would invite them to artful participation, or I would say, so what would be a good enough solution here?
Interesting.
So kind of to redirect them.
So how did that go then? Because it's obvious then there were some moments of tension. You referred to this, and what was the kind of impact of that with them?
It would help to lower the tension in some moments. Sometimes people really had a possible objection to something that was happening. So I actually used consent decision makers, so invited them to explain the argument without explaining them what an objection is. I just simply used it myself and tried to invite them to say why they didn't like something or why they were not happy with it. And that worked quite well in kind of unblocking some of the issues, because we had some situations where we had, for example, a document that was projected and people were fighting about the words to use. And so when I would then refer to a good enough, what would be a good enough solution here, people would then lower a little bit the need for perfectionism and would more easily find a solution. That's something that I noticed over those 2 days, that it helped to kind of bring us to a place of common ground.
Yeah. And if we fast forward to the end of those 2 days, what was the kind of results at the end?
People came out quite happy. had a sense that they had achieved something. There were some agreements that were made, and they had a timeline which I helped them to put up and make sure that the agreements that they made had a deadline on it and a date and an owner. And they really very much celebrated what was the outcome of it. It wasn't easy in some moments, and I was also struggling in some moments. But they definitely had a sense that I had a grip on them as a group. And they appreciated that very much. And I did quite some time boxing as well. So really trying to invite people. I had even a little sound going off, and they thought it was funny. So we made it a little bit humorous as well. So people had a sense of having achieved the goals of the meeting. So it was celebrated. And they invited me to support them again in other occasions.
Great. Yeah, well, never mind S3. I mean, congratulations to you, because that's a challenging environment to go into, isn't it? When the previous time there was some big conflict, and it would be easy to have a sense of responsibility in that, which you had to a point, and to hold the space regardless. And I imagine there were some characters in the room who had their quite strong opinions and quite strong wills and investments in whatever was being decided as well. So great. Yeah.
A lot of the important parts were the invisible work, to understand the influences and the hierarchies in the room. And I think that's one of the big challenges of working with something like the Commission, where there's some political elements going on as well, to understand the hidden dynamics, so they can work with them rather than against them. I think that's one of the important elements.
Yeah.
And S3 really helped me to have this awareness for what are the elements that can help us move forward in this context.
And you did some before work then to prepare for that, I take it?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. So how about we take one other example? So you had the team process and also country dialogue. So whichever one of those jumps out for you.
I think the team process could be interesting. So basically a year later, they invited me to accompany the secretariat, which was a team of 11 people, to help them with some collaboration issues or communication issues, as I called it. And so when speaking to them, I've quite quickly discovered that they were not all working for the same employer. So there were some of them were hired by the framework contractors that I was hired for. And some of them were actually hired through implementing agencies. And so it was very unclear who the delegator was, so who the person was that actually had delegated them the influence and the right, also the possibility of doing the work. And so that created a lot of tensions, because people were reporting to different bosses in some ways. And I quite quickly in the team process uncovered that was the main issue that people were facing. And so I invited them, first of all, giving them a very basic overview of what a driver is, to write down the tensions in form of drivers. And then we quite quickly moved towards making a domain description for the whole team, using the domain description, the domain template. And then we made, with a slightly adjusted version, we made also role descriptions for each of the persons to really clarify within the team the responsibilities, roles and responsibilities. And so they would draft it and then hand it over to the management committee for feedback. And I would accompany them in the feedback process, so that there's a final version where all the delegators had also consented to in some way, so that there were no objections from nobody. And it was a 3 months process in total.
Yeah, I think we communicated about that at some point along the way, didn't we? Yeah. And have you got any insights into what happened next from those 3 months?
It brought them a certain level of clarity, and it brought them a bigger sense of after the sessions that we did together, we had some moments of really speaking about the deeper underlying issues and of building trust, so that people could more openly speak about what really concerned them and about these hidden dynamics and the issues that they were facing. So it definitely helped with trust building. And I think it gave people a kind of framing that they could work with and work from. So I think we did, within the possibilities, we helped to clarify a little bit what the mission was and what the mission was not of the secretariat, so they could more easily argue with the different actors of whether this was their responsibility or something was their responsibility or not, and also to be able to ask for more resources in some of the areas where they had to ask for more resources. So I think it brought them a nice grounding as a team.
Yeah, because I remember when we communicated, it was around this challenge of there being multiple delegators and some ambiguity around the contract between delegator and delegatee, which then also played out within that group, right? And that team process as well. So did you get any insights into what happened, in those conversations with the individual delegators and those representatives who were part of that team process?
So basically, we found out that the contracts that were made with different delegators were quite different. There was quite a difference between one person being hired and another person being hired. And in some cases, we were able to rectify this, and in some cases, we were not. But at least we were able to speak about it. And I think that made a big difference, to be able to explicitly speak about it, and for everyone to have this shared level of awareness around what the issues were and which could be fixed and what we just had to work with as a whole. Yeah. And I think that really unleashed a lot of the tension.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Well, it kind of puts things where they're due somehow, doesn't it? And then frees those people up to get on with what they're doing with whatever the constraints are of the situation. Great. Nice examples. The country dialogues, can you say something briefly about that?
And the country dialogues were a very long, interesting process. It was a 6 months process where we worked with even representative ministers of different Latin American countries and all these different stakeholders and representatives. It was a lot of people that we involved, several hundreds of people. And I think here the important or interesting part was that we made sure that we clarified the intended outcomes at the beginning of each of the events that we were doing. And I think it helped to bring clarity to what the outcome was. And it was not easy. So in some cases, it might be super obvious. But in this case, it was a very, very big challenge because we had to verify intended outcomes of a session with all different stakeholders. And so it was quite a long process. But it gave us like a red thread of the event and a clarity on what the outcomes really needed to be. Mm-hmm. And then also in the moment that we actually, at the end of the event, we wanted to develop a shared positioning statement. And the feedback process was very, very tricky because there were a lot of political elements involved in this feedback process. So different countries would not like one wording or not like the other wording. It was just a one-page document. But it was quite incredible, the amount of objections that we received to it. And so what we did was, on one hand, we invited the countries to meet without the commission, so that the countries would meet independently to develop and adapt the proposal together, which proved to be very, very effective because the new draft they came up with was actually an improved draft of what had been drafted previously. And then as a second step, during the session itself, we made a preliminary agreement because 2 countries hadn't been present in this self-organized process. And so they still had arguments, and we made a preliminary agreement. We listened to their arguments for their objections and then included them afterwards, after the session. And that definitely also helped to make the process much more effective than sending around lots of different drafts without having really clarity on what the newest version is and why somebody put an argument somewhere or an objection somewhere.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing those stories. I'm inspired. It's good to hear. And what I realized listening to you is that this is one particular field of application of S3 when you're a professional facilitator and you're coming in to work with groups and to support them. And so it has a particular kind of nuance, which is a bit different to bringing patterns in yourself in an organization that you're directly part of. So maybe for that, then we could move on to you, Hugo, and you could say something about neoCK, the company that you're with. And whatever you think would be valuable for people to hear about would be great.
Yes, so more or less 1.5 years ago, I was working in a multinational software development company here in Spain, about 700 people. So I was working in the software world. And then I was contacted by a CEO called Jesus Martin. He's like a serial entrepreneur. So this guy has 16 companies, mostly on the solar energy area, but he had this small company. So he told me he lived nearby the place where I worked, and I was looking at your LinkedIn profile. I was looking at this thing that is called Sociocracy and S3, and I think I was looking for this all my life. So would you join one of my small companies? It was called Conquistadores at the time, and help as a head of strategy. And my vision is to go in a journey towards self-management and possibly to an employee-owned company in several years time frame. So I said yes, let's do it. No, so and well, we are on the journey for 1.5 years, and it's been a beautiful journey with these challenges. But what I'd like to share is it's been we've been navigating via tension, and we really like implementing a pull system for change. So we're going slowly and looking at the tensions, see what's best at each moment, deciding together, and then adopting patterns during this period. No, so just to give you an idea, we started in a small team. So I was mostly working in business development at the time that I joined the company. So we started in this team, in the business development team, using meeting practices. Okay, so speaking in rounds, starting to facilitate meetings, preparing for meetings, doing retrospectives, and then we told the other guys, look, we're doing this. Would you like to try it? And they, yeah, okay. So the project guys started to use some of the practices, and then we started to do retrospectives together. So all the teams joined together and say, how was the last month? What can we do better on the next the months ahead, and so on. And then so this started to contaminate positively the organization. And then we started to bring another type of things. And then one of these retrospectives ended up in being a meeting for harvesting drivers. So we introduced the concept of driver in this meeting. We call it mobilizadores. So we just adopted the word, but we also call it drivers. But we use the two terms, no. And so we end up harvesting a lot of drivers with all the organization. And well, would you? Some of you would like to work on how to respond to some of these drivers. Okay, so let's create proposals on how to proceed and move ahead with these drivers. So we created a Google template for doing a synchronous proposal forming, and so everybody in the organization had the opportunity to contribute to these proposals on how to respond to these drivers. And now basically we do this every 3 months. So we have a meeting every 3 months just to harvest drivers in the organization. And then we use a voting process to see what the ones that people feel are most important, and people can join the teams that are responsible to bring proposals on how to respond to these drivers. The latest one is we should clarify roles and domains. So we are starting this process now. So now we are bringing this, but this was born from this process. Okay, so and we are on this on this process. So bringing a pattern after pattern at the piece that the organization needs.
So I'll see if I can remember the two questions I have, and I'll start with the later one. So it's interesting for me to see how often over a period of time, people in an organization that are pulling in patterns from S3 come to the point of realizing it would be valuable to clarify domains. And despite recommending people do that earlier rather than later, it seems to me that often people either don't appreciate why it would be useful, or see it as effortful somehow and kind of kick the can down the road. But most organizations I see that are persisting with pulling in S3 patterns over time come to the realization that that's a valuable thing to do at some point. And I'm wondering, without necessarily having to disclose the details, but what were some of the challenges, or what was the main driver that came up that indicated it would be valuable to clarify domains?
No, it's in this case, it was really tensions around people being in roles that are not clearly defined, and then these people feel that they are maybe delivering in much more than they are supposed to, but there are other people or teams in organization that don't feel so. That feel that maybe they should respond quicker, or in another, I don't know, it's not clear the frontier. So this happened inside projects. So what's the role of a project manager and a technical director? These kind of things, where is the frontier between one and the other? And also people joining these teams that are like responding to drivers. So they start in I'm just I don't have a role right now. I'm just helping to move this drive forward, but then it becomes my responsibility because I started this, And now we need to. This happened, for instance, regarding external communication and posting on social media. I'm doing this, but let's clarify what these roles means, because it's not clear, and it's generating tensions between domains, or people in the organization. So this kind of stuff.
Okay, and the other question was going back to the beginning of this story. Then, so I forget your colleague's name who invited you originally, but he said, "I think I've been looking for this my whole life." And it's very easy. Another common kind of oversight from people is to look at S3 as if it's, they want to do S3 or use S3. And I know you have experience in this as well, of how you kind of turn that around to say, well, before we invest in that too much, let's take a look at what are some of the problems and opportunities it's going to help you to respond to. So can you say something about like first steps, how you got started?
Yes, but in this case, it was not S3 in particular, but it was the concept, So I want to share. So I've been an entrepreneur. I've created 16 companies, but I want to have a company that is employee-owned. We share responsibilities, bring people on board, and so I want to do a different thing that I've done in the past. So it's like sociocracy. Or this idea, of collaborating in a different way, and not S3 in particular, adopting this, So we clarified this, and also the process. So it's in the beginning, it's okay. So how should we run meetings, and what we need to change? So let's try in this team where I'm part of most of the time, see how it works, and invite other people to do this as well. And come, it was also on business development, the CEO, so it was easy for him to experience what we were achieving by bringing these patterns. So it was easier in that sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if this clarifies.
Sure. And so if we fast forward to today, if you were to headline some of the outcomes from this so far, some of the impact of having introduced these changes, what would you say stands out?
No, I would say, so we reinvented the company. So it's a different company with a different name in 1 year. So we worked mostly on presential, on training, so collocated training. 1 year ago, and then there was this thing with COVID, the pandemics, working remotely, and I think that when this happened, we had already almost 6 months of planning meetings, retrospectives, daily stand-ups. So when we had to change the way we worked, this was really, really important. So we had to reinvent the organization, and we had one of the best years, the best year the company had, although all the things that we had to face. So I think this is my biggest takeaway. I think it would have been impossible, very difficult, if we didn't have already some practice with some of these patterns and have this, at least this practice, okay, of bringing the topics, speaking about important problems, and this idea of continuous improvement. So we are obsessed with the retrospectives, and this is not a software company. This is another type of company. So they didn't have agile practices before. Okay, so it's quite impressive.
Sure. Thanks a lot. It's a great example. I'm really happy to be able to share this with people. Okay. Well, for the last part of this conversation, I know that for some time now you have both worked together, often helping people to learn about S3. You've run introductory courses yourself with various people. And in more recent times, you've got involved with NER Group and K2K. Some people might not know what they are, but I would love to use this time, one, for you to share some examples of what you've been bringing into that area of work with the people involved with that, but also just to kind of share a little bit with anyone who's listening to this about some of the great work that NER Group and K2K are doing, because I think there's really wonderful examples there of reinventing organizations that truly are organizations where both the people and the organization thrive. The K2K, I know, has some very interesting approach to that. They've learned quite a lot. They bring a lot of experience. So anything that you would enjoy to share around this whole topic of their work, how that synergizes with your work, I think would be a wonderful way to wrap the call up today. So over to both or either of you as you wish.
Maybe I will just tell the story of how I met this guy. It was Dunia, a common friend, no? So Dunia, I think I was already here in Spain. Yes, I was already in Spain. Dunia was in Lisbon. And we already collaborate around this idea of transforming the world of work and organizations. Hugo, I've just met these guys because she went at the event of the launch of Frederic Laroux's book in Spain. It was and so she met these guys. And they've transformed more than 50 organizations since the 90s to self-management. And they did this in very different types of organizations. Okay, so and the different sizes and different contexts mostly in the Basque country by that time. They did this mostly in the Basque country. And so we organized a small workshop, a 4-hour workshop with them. So we invited them to come to Lisbon and we organized this workshop. And I was really, really impressed with the work they have done. So autonomously, by themselves, they have created their thing, no? Around self-management and how to move companies from a conventional approach to self-management, and then Mira went there, right? Mira, you went there to Bilbao and met them, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I went to visit them on a workshop that also Dunia organized with a lot of friends from Portugal, different entrepreneurs from Portugal. So it was an event very much organized for entrepreneurs that want to get to know more the NER style model, as they call it, or the NER style. So it was quite exciting to visit lots of different companies that had been transformed by K2K over the last 15 years, many of them being family-owned businesses that have been running in a certain way for many, many decades. And companies of different sizes, of between 12 and 400 employees, and that had made the decision to move towards a new way of working and the NER style. When speaking to people that have been working in a company and have been living through a transformation, and this is what NER Group does, is quite radical transformation. So that means that there are certain requirements for the for a company to be able to be accompanied by a NER Group. And one of them is, for example, that I think around 85% of the employees actually agree to the transformation. So it's quite a long journey, and it's a journey that's not always beautiful. So there are moments of people feeling very lost, not having a lot of structure, moments where people don't really know how to do things if there's no point of reference, like as a manager. So it's really a very tricky process, and the K2K team has a lot of abilities and experience of having done this in so many different businesses. So it's quite incredible, the experience that they can bring, and also the safety that they can provide to a company that's undergoing such a process. Mm-hmm. And I think for us, kind of the almost like friendship with K2K, it developed very much. Like Hugo and me already had our friendship and our collaboration going on, and then we started visiting them quite regularly. And eventually there was the first project that came out in Portugal with an AI company with, I think, 50 employees, more or less. It was a factory that were designing like different machineries for manufacturing.
Robots, they make robots, basically.
Yes, and they were undergoing this transformational process. And Dunja, who was in this moment hired to be like the coordinator of this process within the company, she very much insisted that we would come and offer them S3 as a kind of starting point. So to give them possibilities, like to give the employees possibilities of being able to navigate the change. And so we offered a 2-day workshop to them, where we basically focused very much on consent decision-making, on drivers, but also on effective meeting practices and clarifying domains, roles and domains. So bringing them quite a lot of different elements that we felt could be useful for them to navigate things. And I think what K2K has realized is that we can help to build this awareness with S3, that we can really help to bring in this minimum level of awareness and maybe also accompany people in this trust building process, because you have to start trusting that your team, your mates more, if you're being pushed into a self-organized environment. And so there is on one hand the element of offering people tools, and on the other hand, there is this kind of holding people in their process and giving them a sense of, you can do it. It's not us giving you the answers. We don't have the magic key, but you actually have quite a lot of keys, and some of them might work in certain moments. And here's a lot of other possibilities that you can use. And now we've done it in 2 other companies based in Spain, one marketing communications agency based in Madrid, and now we're also in the process with another manufacturing company of lift motors. Yeah, and so I think we're noticing that we can really provide a lot of value at the beginning of the transformational process, and also with the selection of the first level of coordinators during a role selection process. So that's another element where we've been very much helping them, is at the very beginning to like clarify the role of what would be the coordinators or the representatives of the main decision-making circle and of the more operational decision-making circle, and then accompanying people in their decision-making process with the teams. So we spend quite some hours with different teams, receiving different teams, and doing role selection with them without them ever having heard about it. So giving them a very, very basic introduction, and then leading them through the process and inviting them in a very caring and humorous way to have a first experience with S3. And at the same time, also having made a choice, like having this experience of making a decision together of somebody that will represent you for a certain period of time, and experiencing how you can make a decision, even though there might be tensions, in a way where nobody feels left out at the end. And I think it's quite powerful, actually quite a powerful way to start to support that.
Well, one thing that struck me, if I could just ask this, so as you say about people feeling included, And it struck me that based on some of the examples I've seen in the past of kind of transformations towards more distributed authority in organizations going wrong, one, I think the big investment in helping people learn throughout the system, some basic practices, so you build a kind of coherence there so everybody's on the same page in that regard, is really important. And then secondarily, this issue of at least 85% of people agreeing to go with the change. And I think that's great because you actually get a kind of an explicit contract with people. You know, they make a commitment and an intention around that. But my question is, what happens to the other up to 15%? Have you got any examples of that? Because I think some people are going to ask that question, right? It's like, okay, well, great if you're in the 85%, but what about the 15%? And what about if some of those people have something wise to bring? Do they just get thrown out, or what happens?
I think there are many different scenarios of what can happen. And I think maybe our colleagues from K2K have even more to offer because they're much more in the day-to-day. But some people decide to leave the company. That's one of the stories, or some of the stories that we've heard. And also sometimes people do say yes, but they don't really know what they sign up for until you're actually in the process. So I think that's maybe even more the challenge, not just to have the support of people, but also to have an understanding. And that's almost impossible to achieve. So that's the real challenge that I really see of having worked now with a couple of cases and a couple of companies and people, is that in many moments people said yes to something and they didn't fully understand what the implications would be. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also, from my own experience, I guess also you from your experiences will probably also sign up for that, is that you can never really explain to people the experience of self-organization, because there is a part that is really challenging, because it's really about looking into the mirror and seeing kind of the ugly parts of your own behavior sometimes, building that awareness and growing that awareness. There's moments of feeling very lost, of having this weight of responsibility on your shoulders. And there's moments of extreme freedom and a very deep trust building in teams. And so one doesn't come without the other. And I think it's a journey that I think most people that have gone through it and that really have a certain level of openness to it, they will never want to go back to normal or to where they have been before. But there are people that are not ready for it, or that just want to go to work and just do their job and have somebody to tell them what to do. And so in some cases, people have had to decide that there will be a manager in a certain section of the organization because the people are just not ready for it, or they don't have the level of implication. So yes, all of this is possible.
I will add this. There's this like rule of the 80% that support the transition. There's another principle that no one will be fired, because of course this has a lot of implications. For middle management, for instance, no. So what will I do in this new? So a lot of people have to find a new space, in the organization. So there's also this compromise that no one will be fired. So there's also this. We are here to help everyone to find their place inside the organization. So there's a commitment, on this.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I was thinking of an example with a customer, a couple of thousand people in the company who made a transition towards self-management, and they did it from the top down. And there's obviously examples both ways, like from the bottom up and the top down. And people in management positions were given the option to remain in those roles they were given the option to maintain the salary that was connected to those roles for 2 years, after which their salary would revert to whatever was the value that had been given to whichever areas of responsibility that they had. Some people decided to leave, but many stayed. And all of those, every single one of those people were in a position where they were remunerated more after those 2 years than they had been previously in a management position, because they just reorientated, and they took their technical background and skills an experience of managing organizations and just found other places to plug in instead. So that reminds me, when you say nobody's fired, there's that option to stay as well. And like, to wrap this up, because NER Group has the advantage of 20, 25 years of experience in this. And as we say in English, the proof is in the pudding. So they get some pretty good results, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you say something briefly about that? I mean, you might not have the details, but just an approximation of why people still continue to reach out to them and ask for help. What kind of results does this approach bring?
Well, they have there's a lot of public information, no? So there are many cases, including in the Corporate Rebels website and so on. So you have the numbers there. The first story is about Eraser. So this is the bus company that produces electric buses for everywhere, South Africa, and so they were about to close, and they were able to turn around completely. So the numbers are absolutely impressive, no? So, and they started with this, and then this has going on. I would say, I think I'm not sure on the numbers, but around 50% of the companies that approach them are having difficulties. So there's a pragmatic, but it's not always the case. It's about half the cases are companies that are really struggling. So the turnaround is incredible because they are able to do it. But the other cases are cases of success as well. The companies that are healthy and just want to improve even more the collaboration, no? and the paradigm in which they are operating. So they have both examples.
Yeah, and I think there's also a social impact here. So that I remember speaking to a lady who used to be the secretary of her boss of the company. It was a manufacturing company of over 400 employees. And 5 years later, she was the coordinator of the main decision-making circle. And she was explaining how she was helping her boss to write addresses on letters all day long and doing very simple tasks that she felt sometimes even the time that she spent on doing it, it would probably have been more effective if he would have done it himself in some moments. So looking at all the talent, unused talent that was in the company and in the organization, right? It's just one little example of the talent that can be used. I spoke to some people at a manufacturing plant that explained to me how they organize a time schedule of working the same machine 24 hours between them. So and in a way that mothers could go and pick up their children on time, and somebody who enjoyed going hunting could go hunting on the day that he loved to do this. So how it allowed people to live their life more fully somehow because of that. And I think then there's the other element of freedom because sometimes you're born in a family and your dad or your grandfather owns this amazing business, but it's really not your interest. So it's also an opportunity for people to delegate responsibilities they don't want to have. Or you get to a certain age where a company, it feels like a child almost to founders. And sometimes you do want to let go and you want to move on and have another chapter of your life. And I think it's one way that very strongly allows this amount of freedom.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, folks, we're about 3 minutes away from me jumping out of here into a call with Greater Than. They have a talk tonight on Join the Age of Participation. So I'm looking forward to getting into that and hopefully going to learn some things. I want to thank you so much for this. I think it's amazing examples that you've shared, and I'm super excited that we can share this out in the world. If you were to reach into your bucket of wisdom based on all of these experiences the last year, and there was one thing you would say to others. So advice is a tricky thing, so it's not about advice, but just something to be mindful of if people are considering in moving towards more self-organization within an organization, because it looks like that would be valuable. What would be one key thing you would suggest they were mindful of or aware of somehow? And Hugo, how about you start?
I would say whenever we start, for instance, this selection process, helping teams to select for the first time their representatives, it's just a matter of trusting people. And sometimes people come with us from the like observers, or we tell them from someone from HR, from the people departments, they selected this person and say, wow. So I would have selected him myself or her myself, so sometimes they are surprised, and it's always trust people, I would say.
Great, thanks. And Mira?
From me, I think it's maybe finding allies. So reaching out to people that maybe are in different moments of self-organization, so that really building a network of people. And I think that's what we've been doing between us over the last years as well. So really having a network where you can reach out to each other and say, like, how did you solve this thing about budget distribution or transparent salaries, for example, so that we can really reach each other. I think no entrepreneur or no manager or coordinator or nobody who has ever worked in this field and is passionate about the field would deny an hour of their time, because we're all passionate about what we do. So I think it's the invitation to reach out and to connect and learn from each other. Yeah.
Wonderful. Such a great way to end. Thank you so much, both of you. I would love to stay on and talk more, but having a time constraint sometimes is a good thing because it helps us get to the point. So I wish you enjoy a wonderful evening. I'll let you know when this is edited, and we can share it with others too. So I wish you a great evening, and thanks again.
Amazing.
Thank you so much, James, for the invitation.
See you soon.
See you.